Hello everyone. So I wanted to make this quick video because I've been hunting all over the internet trying to find the correct guide and process to upgrade the firmware on this Creality CR10S PRO V2. Since I've done the upgrades to direct drive, it's got an all-metal hot end, upgraded heater that's 50 watts so it can handle higher temperatures. The limiting factor at this point is the firmware, the stock firmware that comes with this CR10S PRO V2. And there isn't a lot of clear guides, or at least not clear to me. I found them very confusing. The file links have changed. The file names are different. So what I've done here is I got the CR10S PRO V2. I've taken the bottom cover off. There's a couple of things that you need to identify prior to starting. First thing you're going to need to know is the version of the board that you have. In my case, it's a version 2.4, and I'll show you guys where you got to look to find that information. Another thing too that you need to determine is how the BL Touch is wired. My CR10S PRO V2 came with the BL Touch already pre-installed from the factory, so there wasn't a need to change out the capacitive touch probe for the BL Touch. It came with it already. But there is a couple of questions that when you're trying to upgrade the firmware that you need to be aware of, and that's how this BL Touch is connected. So I'm going to show you the guide that I found online that gives you all the information that you need, along with I'll also include the direct file links to the files that I've used. Now I haven't flashed it yet. I'm about to do it here in real time with you guys. So we'll see if it goes successfully or if I'm going to run into any problems. Anyhow, let me, first thing we got to do is figure out if our printer will connect to the laptop using the USB cable. So I'm going to do that first. So plug in your machine, power it on, and then plug in your USB cable to the computer. And then we'll flip over to the computer now, and I'll show you what you need to look for. So here on the computer, what you want to do is turn on your 3D printer and wait for it to get through all of its startup processes, and then go ahead and plug it in. Now when you plug it in, if this is the first time that you plug it in, Windows is gonna show you unknown device, but give it a couple of seconds and it should figure it all out for you. And I'm going to show you how mine displays it. Ports, and it comes up as USB serial port COM4. This is important because we need this COM port, and how you can verify is by unplugging it. So I'm going to unplug it here, and then you notice that my COM port is no longer here. So it's disappeared because that's the only device that I have that uses a COM port. So when I plug it back in, comes back as US serial port COM4. Okay. All right. So now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our files. This thing requires 2 flash files, one for the screen, and then one that's done using the USB cable to flash the motherboard itself. Okay, so this is the first one, and it's just going to download it. All right. So let's get the next one. Now this is Xloader. It's going to be the little program that's going to load our firmware to the motherboard. And then this is the firmware. And this assumes that you have the BL Touch installed from the factory. And then this last one is a guide that Tiny Machines put together that I found very helpful because it takes a lot of the mystery out of doing this job. So this guide is to installing the BL Touch, but it does go through all the details. So if you scroll down here, it tells you how to take it all apart and everything. But the part that I needed was the section that talks about the right here. Okay, so once you take your bottom cover off, it shows you the stuff you gotta remove. But this is the part that I needed. So right here, if you notice, it shows you a picture of your motherboard, and the way that it's connected, the way the BL Touch is connected will determine which file that you need. Now I've included the files for a 2-pin white plug into Z positive, which you'll see is those two little cables that these two little cables right here that plug in. So this indicates that it's wired as 2-pin white plug into Z positive. Okay, and it says it right here. So use the color. So they got an orange arrow, orange dot over here. This is what they're talking about. And then the other one is the rest of the cables here. They plug in. And that's the 3-pin black into D11. All right. So that part's important. Okay, next thing we got to do is prepare the SD card. So I already have an SD card installed in my SD card reader. It's the default card that came with the CR10S PRO V2. And I've already copied the files that were on it into a separate folder because I'm going to format the original card. So here we go. Let's format that. And it's important that it's default FAT32 and then kilobytes. You're going to change this to 4096. Very important that you do that, otherwise it's not going to work. And then quick format is okay. Click start. It's going to give you a warning here. Click OK if you don't have any valuable files on it. All right, that's done. Close that out. Okay, next thing we're going to do now is we're going to grab our files that we downloaded. And I've already put them here on my Samsung drive. So I'm just going to grab the first one, which was the DWin one. And I'm just going to grab it exactly the way it is. I'm just going to right click on it, copy. And then I'm going to paste it to my drive M, which is the one we just formatted. All right, so now this one's ready to go. We don't have to do anything else with this. Now we're just going to take our little flash card out of here. And if it's the right flash card where you put the files, it should disappear from the screen once you remove it from your dock. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is go back to the 3D printer. All right, guys, so right now, this is the stock firmware that came with it. So when I click over here where it says settings, I have right here it says English language, and that's all I have, just English language. So once we do our firmware update, if everything works out okay, we should get more functionality here. So let's go ahead and shut the 3D printer off, and then I'll show you where you need to install the little flash card to flash the display. So we're going to be flashing the display first, and then we're going to flash the motherboard using the computer. Alright guys, so I already took the bottom cover off, and it's just a bunch of screws all around the bottom. So once you remove those and you get into it, you got these two boards right here. So let me show you first how to find the version of the board that you're using. So if you look down here, right here, it gives you the version of the board. At least mine gives me the version right here. So mine is Creality. Hold on, let me turn on the lights so you guys can see. So mine is a Creality 3D version 2.4. Okay, so that's the first one. And then remember in that little tutorial that it talks about the BL Touch connection and whether it's Z positive or Z negative. So if you look here, these two cables here, they're closest to the ribbon cable, right? So these two closest to the ribbon cable. This indicates a Z positive connection for the BL Touch. I'm not sure what the Z negative looks like, but this verifies that it's a Z positive connection. And then these are the other three cables for the BL Touch. Okay. All right, guys. So I got this still slide here to show you the different things that you need to pay attention to. This flashing procedure is specifically for this board. It has to be a version 2.4. And it may work on a previous version. I don't know because I haven't tried it on a previous version, but it did work for me. So I have a version 2.4. That's indicated over in that bottom left corner. And then we need to verify that the BL Touch is wired to the Z Plus port, which in this case it is. The reason that's important is the firmware that we're using is specifically for a BL Touch plugged into the Z Plus port. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is the model of the Atmel chip. That can be found on that upper square. And I rotated the image so that you can read that it's an Atmel ATMEGA 2560. And that's important because when we turn on the X loader, it may or may not default to that. So we're going to need to select that along with the COM port that we already know is COM4 in my case. You would just have to plug yours in and see what your computer tells you the COM port connection is for your 3D printer, and then just set that appropriately. Baud rate needs to be set at 115,200. So these are things that you got to remember, okay? All right, let's continue with flashing the screen. Okay. Next thing is the display board. So here's the display board. And then here's the little slot for the SD card. So all I'm going to do is grab my SD card and stick it in there. It goes in like this. And it clicks, okay? So it's spring loaded. All right, so let's get that thing in there. I'm going to go ahead and plug the printer back in, turn it on, and it should take the update. I'll show you guys what it looks like on the front. All right, so now I got my printer plugged in. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And hopefully it'll flash the firmware, or at least to the screen. Yep. Okay, showing process end. That means it's completed. All right, so that's it. All right, so after you flash your display, the next thing you got to do is remove the SD card from in here. And then now we're going to flash the firmware. What I'm going to do now is turn on the printer and then plug it in to the USB port. And then now the next thing that we need to do is we need to flash the firmware. So to flash the firmware, we're going to use a little program called X Loader. I've already put it on the on my USB drive, so I'm going to go ahead and go to it. And from the last time, we still remember what our COM port is. It's still COM4. Here it is right here. Now, what's important is that you set the baud rate on the X loader. So let's go to the X loader. All right, you don't need to do anything with this. So this is what you want right there. Actually, ours is a 2560. So the 2560 is the board that we're using. So it's a 2560. Let me double check and make sure. Yeah, right here. So 2560. So that's the one that we're using. That's the CR10S PRO. So make sure that you change that. And then the baud rate, we can leave that alone. Change the COM to COM4, which is the one that's loaded. And then we're going to select our file. So this is the one that's going to be linked in the description. So I got mine over here. So here's my hex file. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. And then I'm just going to click upload. Alright, it shows that it was uploaded successfully. So that's it, guys. So now I'm gonna check to make sure that, let's see. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this, and we'll go back to the 3D printer and make sure that everything is working correctly. Alright guys, here's the moment of truth. Let's see if it works. So that's a good sign. Alright, so we got the Creality startup thing. Now let's check and see if we got additional functionality. So before we used to have a language button in the bottom center. Let's see what we got now. So now we got a tools button. Click on that. And here we have our advanced features. We can adjust the steps. And this is for setting the probe offset along with the extruder steps. We also have display settings. PID tuning. And this is awesome because this is what this printer should have been set up like from the factory. And since they didn't do it, they limit the different things that you can add to this machine. Without being able to adjust the probe offset, if you want to reposition the where the probe goes or change your hot end or anything like that, there's no way to adjust it. But now with this updated firmware, you can. So if you followed my last tutorial on installing the Micro Swiss direct drive system on the CR10S PRO, so you would have printed out a couple of STL files. One of them is this BL touch bracket here, this little BL touch bracket, and then the other one is this little spacer. So I'm going to show you how to set the offset correctly, but until you update the firmware, you are going to need that little spacer here. Otherwise, the BL touch will miss the bed when it's trying to auto level. So let me show you how to get those measurements. So the probe offset, all it is a measurement between the hot end and the probe tip. And to get that measurement, you just use a set of calipers. So you're grabbing a set of calipers like this, opening it up, and then taking that measurement between there and there. So if you follow the tutorial that I put together, it's negative 40.5 is the offset, and I'll show you how to set it in the menu. Another measurement that you're also going to have to get is the y-axis offset, and to get that, you got to come over to the side. So you're going to come over to the side, and then you're going to measure with your calipers the distance between the print head and the probe. So if you can see, it's not directly in line with the probe, so it's off about 9 millimeters. So it would be negative 9 millimeters. So negative 40.5 on the X, and then negative 9 on the Y-axis. And we'll confirm that in the menu here in a second. I put this slide in here to explain how to get these measurements for your bed probe. So what I have here is a simple grid, and think of this as the X-axis is the side-to-side movement of the print head, and then the Y is the forward and back of the print surface. Anything that is to the left of the print head on the X-axis will be a negative number expressed in millimeters. So if you, let's say your hot end is in the center of your build plate, and your BL Touch or Easy ABL, whatever sensor you have, is to the left of that hot end, the number is going to be expressed in a negative, it's going to be a negative millimeter. and it's going to be negative on the X. If it was directly in line with the print head, when you're looking at it from the side, then it would simply be a negative X number, and that's it. But in this case, the BL Touch is not only to the left of the print nozzle, but also in front of it. And anything that's in front of the nozzle is expressed as a negative number in millimeters, but this time on the Y-axis. If it was behind the print head, then it would be a positive number expressed in millimeters on the Y-axis. So this for me was very confusing to understand, but think of the print head as 0. So if you're left of the print head, there would be a negative number. Negative X if you're talking about left to right movement. If you're talking about front to back, then it would be Y. And if it's in front of the print head, it would be a negative Y. If it's behind the print head, it would be positive Y. Anyway, I hope this helps because it was a source of confusion for me. So now on this next slide, what I have is how you would enter the settings in the CR10S PRO V2. So go into the menu, click on where it says probe offset, and then where it shows X, you're going to put in, if you're following my guide and printed the same parts that I printed and did the same micro Swiss direct drive upgrade, these would be your values. Minus 40.5 on the X and minus 9 on the Y. The Z is determined automatically by the sensor, so you don't have to worry about that one. And that's it. Later on, you can get into checking the steps on the extruder. I haven't gotten to that point. I just needed to make sure I could print and that my print head would not miss the build plate along with the auto bed leveling probe. All right, guys, I hope this clarifies things because it did for me. It was confusing. All right, so you're gonna come to your to your menu here. Click on Settings. You're gonna click on Tools, and then you're gonna adjust the steps. And you can see the X is negative 40.5, and again, this is if you're using the STL files from my installation video. And then the Y is negative 9. And then don't worry about the Z. The Z is calculated by the BL Touch, and it's going to differ from one machine to the other. Okay, guys, let me show you how I was able to fix the X and Y offset of the nozzle. If you followed my previous tutorial, you guys should have printed out a couple of parts. One is for the BL Touch, which is right here. Sorry, I got this thing in the way here. So you guys would have printed out this bracket for the BL Touch, and then you also would have printed out a spacer. And if you're running the stock firmware, you're going to need this spacer. The one in the tutorial on how to install the micro Swiss direct drive is a 7mm spacer. So what we have here is a 5mm spacer, and what this does is it'll trigger the X limit switch, which is over here, and then that will allow the tip to be in the correct position when you set the machine on 0. And then how I was able to resolve the Y is using the same process. So I went into the limit switch for the Y-axis, which is back here, and it used to have a screw. You can, let me see if I can turn the light on, maybe you guys can see it. My hands in the way. Okay, so if you can see, it's kind of hard to tell here, but anyway, right back here there's a tapped space for the screw, the original screw that came that fastened this limit switch down, but it was further back. It was about, I want to say, 5mm back, and because of that, the limit switch was being triggered too far back, which limited where the extruder tip was lining up on the build plate. So let me show you now with this modification how it works. And all I used here is one of the little rail nuts along with a shorter screw, and then I just moved it up 5 millimeters in my case. It may vary if you have a different machine for you, so just take some measurements. So before, what was happening is when I went into home it and put it on, let's say, so I'm going to press home first and I'm going to show you. I'm going to let the machine just do its regular homing process. You see how it goes and it hits that limit switch? So it does that twice, and then it does it also with the bed. I'm going to do a couple of actions with the probe. And that's it. So now it's in the ready position. So before, when I was pressing 0 on the x-axis, the tip was winding up beyond the build plate. I'm going to show you now. So you see how now I got about 3 millimeters before the edge of the build plate? So that's on the X. Now I'm going to show you what it is on the Y. You can see, so it's right over the front left corner of the build plate, which is exactly where it needs to be. And then if I press 300 on the X, I'm going to select 300 on the X. So that's just slightly over the build plate. So I got about maybe 2 or 3 millimeters off the build plate. And then we're going to do the same thing with the Y. So we'll set the Y to 300, which is the size of the build plate. Oops. So there we go. So I'll make sure I put the new STL file for that little spacer in the description. You guys can grab that. You got the same setup. And yeah, so I'm super impressed. It's working great. We also have expanded capabilities because of the new menu options. Let me show you that. Let's get this guy home again. So before, when the flash, this button here was a language button. Now, we've got all these cool adjustments. So there's our probe offset. PID tuning. And then another cool thing is the on the leveling, there's so before, when I would go to auxiliary leveling, I didn't have these steps here, so I couldn't use the Z offset. It would only give me this grid here. and then I would have to manually mess with the springs. So now I can use the Z to get the nozzle closer to the print bed before having to make crazy adjustments with the springs. So that's kind of cool there. And then we can confirm our flash here. So there it is, Tiny Machines 3D 10S Pro V2. And then this is the firmware version, 2.0.9 _ DW7.4. We're going to do a little test print here. So here's the completed first print after tweaking the firmware and making some adjustments in Cura. So as you can see, it's really good. So this is a stringing test, and that's it. That's all you got, that tiny little line of filament. That's the only stringing out of the whole print session. So pretty impressive. This is using the Micro Swiss direct drive system and the Micro Swiss hot end. We're also running the Tiny Machines 3D firmware.